Vivian Wong and Danais Ponce, who are community planners with the City of Burnaby. They're going to come up, and I think we'll have you at that podium up there on the stage if that works for you. I don't know if we have a second mic that we can get. Oh, it's all up there. Oh, fantastic. And we'll give you the clickers. And as you walk up, I'll just mention a few words about what you're here for. So a number of you asked at the survey we did at the end of the last session, how do we know that the city is actually cares about what we have to say? That was a question that a number of you flagged for us in that exit survey. And that's a question that we're going to pose to City Council later today. We're going to ask them what they're curious to learn from you and how you'll know that they've considered your recommendations. But I also just wanted to say that Vivian and Danais have gone through again and read every single word that you've written for your ideas, and they've done policy analysis to understand what that would mean for the city. So there's no bigger idea to me that you're being taken seriously than the fact that the city is spending active time considering what you have to say and responding to it and being in conversation with you. And with that, I want to turn it over to Vivian and Danais.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Robin, Elder Jackie, and everyone from the Assembly for having us today. And yes, as Robin said, we're here to have a comparison and analysis walkthrough of the Community Assembly's emerging action ideas and how that compares with the concurrent OCP process for the draft policy directions. Just an overview of what we're hoping to do today. We want to provide a high-level overview of what we thought about the emerging action ideas from the Assembly, and then dive deeper into comparing them by themes that were identified by the Assembly as well. We want to talk about what aligns, what are the constraints, considerations, and some reflection questions back to the Assembly, and some time for discussion and questions as well. And you'll also see on your table, we've printed out the slide deck for this presentation for you to peruse during and after the presentation as well. Okay, so at a glance, most of the emerging action ideas really align with existing City of Burnaby policies or Burnaby 2050 proposed policy directions. The emerging action ideas are holistic, thoughtful, and equitable, and we can see that there are innovative input that weave in the complex issues of today and tomorrow related to climate action, accessibility, affordability, and community building. And overall, the OCP development prioritizes very similar issues, but the proposed OCP policy directions are framed at a higher and broader level than the Community Assembly's emerging action ideas. So with that, I'll just hand it over to Danais.
Thank you, Vivian. Hi, everyone. So now we're going to move into comparing emerging actions with the Burnaby 2050 draft policy directions. And for the purpose of this presentation, we've grouped the emerging directions and action ideas brought forward by yourselves into a few policy topics. So starting with housing affordability and non-market housing, a lot of your emerging actions align with the home strategy as well as the Burnaby 2050 policy directions, especially when it comes to deepening affordability and adding additional non-market and market rental housing units, as well as alignment in terms of partnering with other levels of government to facilitate the provision of housing, as well as obtaining financial assistance. Some of the constraints that we wanted to highlight relate to the municipal landlord registry, which is likely not within the jurisdiction of the municipality. Tenants and landlord relationships are currently regulated under the Residential Tenancy Act, and whatever the city decides to do, we would need to be sure that we're not in conflict with what their act says. We also wanted to highlight that the development and operation of non-market housing units, especially those on city lands, are usually done by nonprofit organizations, and the city usually provides the land, servicing, or some capital contribution towards the housing project. And some items for consideration. We wanted to highlight the forthcoming Housing Authority, which is an organization that will focus on the delivery of non-market and subsidized housing. Also, any emerging actions related to people experiencing homelessness will relate to a forthcoming set of recommendations that have come out of the Mayor's Task Force on unsheltered community members, and will speak to wraparound supports as well as creating a shelter strategy. And finally, we wanted to highlight the difference between a projection and a target. So when it comes to housing, the projections we have at this time have been given to us by Metro Vancouver, and they have been influenced by data from BC Stats and Stats Canada, and include immigration, population growth, births, etc. When it comes to targets, though, these are also, or could be guided by data, but it's something that the city could aim towards. And in terms of housing, our targets are usually guided by the Housing Needs Report, which is updated every 5 years. And so we have two questions that we wanted to bring back for the community, or for the assembly to think about and reflect upon, especially as we move into the afternoon portion of the activity. And the first question for the housing affordability relates to expanding on the idea of an alternative to the current developer-led model of housing development. So what does that mean? What could that look like, and what incentives could be involved? Moving on to public transit service and encouraging ridership, transportation infrastructure for biking, e-biking, walking, and rolling. Again, a lot of the emerging actions align with the Burnaby Transportation Plan, as well as the Burnaby 2050 policy directions, especially when it comes to supporting transit ridership and amenities at stations, having more cycling infrastructure, working closely with TransLink, and improving healthy, safety, and active living. And some of the items for consideration relate to the park and ride. So these have not been contemplated within the Burnaby Transportation Plan or the Burnaby 2050 policy directions. And this is because the land around the SkyTrains is actually quite valuable. And so we believe it should be prioritized for other uses, such as residential, commercial, and employment. And related to these themes, the questions that we wanted to bring forth for reflection relate to emerging actions related to park and ride and e-scooter affordability. They sound like a last mile or first mile issue. So are there any options that we could explore, or how can we, the city, address this? As well as we have not considered incentivizing local e-bike affordability and local e-bike production. What are the barriers for e-bikes now, and is this the role of the city? Okay. For the topic of physical accessibility, safety for sidewalks and public spaces, again, the actions align with the Burnaby Transportation Plan and the Burnaby 2050 policy, draft policy directions, especially when it comes to transportation and community well-being. And we're in alignment in regards to the Universal Design Guidelines for pedestrian infrastructure, as well as working with TransLink and the city's Access Advisory Committee. And some items for consideration relate to the Burnaby Transportation Plan Big Move. So we wanted to bring your attention to the fact that the city is expanding the pedestrian network. And so by 2030, 80% of the pedestrian network will be completed to provide accessible and safe walking and rolling environment. And a second item for consideration, it's that the city is developing its accessibility strategy as required by the Accessible BC Act. And even though there's not public information yet, the strategy will be completed by fall of this year. So I'll pass it on to Vivian.
Okay, thank you, Danais. So moving on to the next theme, services and amenities within walking distance of residential areas. These emerging action ideas that you provided to us strongly align with what's proposed in Burnaby 2050. What aligns is the importance to foster complete communities, have more mixed use, more convenience, amenities, more ground floor retail. And the mention of in-home childcare is already permitted within Burnaby in residential areas. What does not align as much are details to actions related to home businesses. We want to share that maybe there's some uses like childcare or food-related businesses require permits and approval from other agencies like Fraser Health for them to be feasible. And we also want to encourage you to consider what is appropriate and complementary as a home-based business. For example, would the food prep business cause a smell? Would you create extra garbage? Do clients need parking? Or if clients will visit the premises frequently, what are the business's hours of operation? And so what type of work or business would be complementary to be in residential areas? Something we also want encourage you to consider is that there is a limited market for commercial retail, and the city would like to be strategic about where to locate retail businesses to foster a strong local market in order for the businesses to be successful. What we're also doing right now is updating our zoning bylaw, and within that scope, it includes simplifying our current zoning districts and supporting more mixed uses. So that is already underway. And two reflection questions we want to share and ask the group is, how can the city make it easier to establish small businesses? What really is the red tape? And are there other business models that are simply missing in Burnaby? Your local startups, pop-ups, or co-working space, perhaps? Moving on to the next theme, community amenities, spaces, and events. These emerging actions align with what's proposed in Burnaby 2050. What really resonates is more space and facilities for people to gather and connect. We also want to see a more diverse use of roads and sidewalks, protections of green space, using underused existing spaces, and working with host nations. What does not align as much is the action related to supporting no-car areas. This is not currently mentioned in Burnaby 2050. And something to consider is that not everyone in the community likes the idea of car-free districts. So the question back to the group is, how can the city overcome community or business resistance to car-free areas or days? And for the next theme, availability of childcare facilities, these emerging action ideas strongly align with what's proposed in Burnaby 2050, as well as Burnaby's Childcare Action Plan from 2021. There's alignment in that we want to see more childcare across the city, and we want to seek opportunities through development to deliver childcare. There are some constraints is that while we want to seek opportunities, not every site is suitable for childcare because healthy built environment and safety has to be considered first, and that for licensed childcare group programs, outdoor space is required as part of the programming. We also want to share that the Childcare Action Plan for Burnaby, there are targets outlined in terms of new childcare spaces that we would like to partner or create within Burnaby, and that the city is currently working on a childcare design guidelines, which will give more clarity and consistency on how new childcare spaces should be developed. We also want to mention that municipalities have to work in partnership with childcare operators to deliver childcare, especially for programs that are for infants and toddlers. And so while municipalities could seek opportunities to provide space and partner, We do not deliver the programs directly, and we would always have to work with other operators to actually run the childcares. And so the question back to the group is, especially in one of the emerging action ideas, it mentions that there should be childcare for certain scales of development, including institutions. So it would be great if you can tell us more. Are there examples of where you think not having childcare is a missed opportunity? There's a typo on the slide. Okay, and lastly, for the last theme, housing, forms, and density, the emerging actions do align with what's proposed in Burnaby 2050, especially for emerging action number 1 that was listed. It really aligns with the corridor growth scenario. As well, what was proposed in the emerging actions really align with the provincial small-scale multi-unit housing regulations, which do allow multiplex up to 4 stories permitted on all lots that are previously zoned as single and 2-family residential. Some of the constraints is that within the emerging action ideas, there was a mention of requiring 50% of new housing in 4 to 6 stories to be rental. And within that rental, a mix of non-market and market. City staff think that it may impact the financial feasibility of the project with that mix of housing and the housing form. And the consequence of that, it might deter housing from being built at all. And so another consideration related to rental is that the city has a rental use zoning policy, which requires market and non-market rental units to be integrated within strata developments, so requirement for replacement or at times inclusionary of new rental units. So a question back to the group is that if you could get more non-market housing for more height, would you make this trade-off? So I think that's it for our cross-reference. Here's just a summary of all the questions that we've posed back to the group.
Thank you so much, Danais and Vivian. Let's give a round of applause, because that was a lot of work that went into that. What we're going to do now is, I think we're going to try to keep this not as a question for Danais and Vivian, but we're going to take their questions and give them back to you. So we have a list of, I believe it's 8 different questions that Danais and Vivian have outlined for us as far as what's the difference, what are you looking for that's different than a developer-led model? What do you mean by that? There's questions around the idea of park and ride and e-scooter development that they flagged that were questions for them. Questions around how to reduce barriers for e-bikes, how to get that last mile issue as far as your last mile of travel or your first mile of travel. How can they make it easier to establish small businesses, and what types of businesses are you talking about? What types of businesses do you want inside your neighborhoods? How can the city overcome people who disagree with no-car areas, if that's what you want to propose? Different ideas about where do you want childcare to exist? And would you make that trade-off between more height if it meant that you could get more non-market units, if there were taller buildings? So those are questions that have been posed to you. And now I'm interested if anybody wants to provide any thoughts about those. You can choose whichever one you'd like. What do you think? This is what it looks like from the world of a city planner. What, oh, we've got a thought. Okay, great.
Thank you. I have a lot of different thoughts. The one I'll touch on first, I guess, is related to the car-free areas. With anything, you have to have something in place for people to actually see and experience without just talking about it and being like, oh, we're going to have this area car-free. There's a lot of opposition or uncertainty, I guess. And so there needs to be at least one place first and be like, we're going to do this, and this is going to be our one place to start. If it goes well, then we can look at other areas where we're doing it from. And I think that's the case with almost anything. Not even necessarily as a temporary pilot project, because then there's a lot of like, oh, will this get reversed? Will this not get reversed? Have something that's permanent. Be like, this is going to be a car-free area. For example, Metrotown Mall is being redeveloped over the next 30 years. Be like, instead of having new streets and new streets for cars going all the way through that, have a dedicated pedestrian zone. It's already pedestrianized internally within the mall. Why do we need to create new spaces for cars there? And so, not saying that has to be the place, but having some place in the city to start and be like, this is where you can go and look and experience and see how this works and operates. And it's, in my mind, it's not going to be like, we're going to create a kilometer square where it's no cars at all. It'll just be these local streets, maybe like 2 or 3 streets in one area, and have them scattered throughout the city in different parts where it's focused on that community vibrancy, on that healthy, active living, and sustainable transportation.
Joel, before we lose that thought, make sure to get out your worksheet 6.1 and write down that as a potential amendment that you might want to propose next day at the assembly. Who else would like to respond? Who's got some thoughts about how your recommendations interact with these ideas and constraints and questions that the city planners have brought back to you?
It's mostly just my curiosity on what do you mean for the last mile issue, like first mile, last mile issue. I'm not really sure what does that mean.
Sorry, we were flipping back to this to the slide. Basically, the first mile or last mile refers to like the last portion of the journey. So think about, for example, if you get to a transit hub or a SkyTrain, like how do you go from the SkyTrain to your home? Right? Maybe you need to walk. Maybe you live a little farther and you need to take the bus. Maybe you need to drive a bit more. Like that's what we mean by those terms. Yeah, no worries.
Joseph.
Joseph here. I'm going to return to number 3, number 2, and a little bit into 3. The last mile issue, I'm thinking of the example we have on a global scale from the Netherlands, where they've been dealing with this for the last 40, 50 years, and have been steadily constricting the freedom of movement for automobiles in the urban areas and encouraging the use of bicycles, not e-scooters. I think that isn't actually worthy of consideration because e-scooters are inherently a dangerous mode of transportation. If you speak to people in the hospitals, you'll find out the facts. But with e-bikes, it's not a last mile consideration because proper e-bikes that are designed for our weather, the rain. For example, there's one company in Burnaby building them on a very small scale. Those bikes can freely travel throughout the city in timing that's as good or better than cars. And they're not overwhelming in their demands for the physical requirements. However, to encourage the use of such e-bikes, the city does have it within its means to give some encouragement and enabling for private companies to further develop them to a larger scale. That's all I'm going to say for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Joseph. All right. We've got one back here. Okay. We'll create a queue.
Hello, Selena here. Just to add on to the same area, that's why I want to get the chance right away. Along the e-bike, it's great to encourage local companies to develop and also lower the price to make it affordable so people can actually leverage it. And then the reason why e-bike is more applicable compared to other part of the city is how hilly Burnaby is. So not everybody is able to ride a regular bike even if they want to. Just considering coming from BCIT to Metrotown, that hill is quite something to conquer. The other thing city can help is also the safety side of things. So right now, there's the bike lane is very minimum in Burnaby compared to Vancouver, and often you still have to share with the car. So even with an e-bike, like I've been trying to bike around after joining the assembly a little bit more, and I do notice the car has to overtake me on the bike dedicated line, like when we have to share the road, which make me feel a little bit unsafe. With the e-bike, right? It's definitely not acceptable share with pedestrian because that poses a danger to pedestrian. So more dedicated bike lane is definitely something the city can help to support the e-bike initiative. And then the other one I was thinking around is the bike sharing program. If that's another way to address the affordability, not everybody can pay $2,000, $3,000 for an e-bike, $10,000. Wow, okay. So, but with a e-bike sharing program, maybe not fully funded by the city, but can be partnership with the city because it requires, a little bit of land to do storage and stuff like that. And that could be something to lower the barrier for people, citizens, to start using e-bike and really take advantage to be more active and hopefully also accountable for the weather. I know it's going to be more popular in the summer, maybe less leverage in the winter, but still, like it's a good way to really start people to use, more green transportation. Yeah.
Thanks, Selena. All right, we have time for one or two more. Okay, we've got a cluster of activity over here. Everybody wants to talk now. All right, we'll keep it really quick and we'll try to get all three of you, okay?
So just a quick follow-up question to a couple of housing-led ones. Is there anywhere where we can learn a little bit more about the breakdown of what it may look like for the cost of this housing? So if we're putting in like more either non-market housing or going for the height trade-off, for example, right? What does it actually look like for the breakdown for how much the city is taking in for like the development fees versus how much the developer is supposed to be making? I mean, obviously some of this is going to be a bit speculative, but what you could potentially do is look at what the actual market rates on everything that is sold versus what the city is taking in, and the difference is what the developer takes into their overall.
Sure, I'm going to suggest we hold that question because Johannes is going to be talking about that in just a moment. But keep it in mind. Okay, Evelyn?
So the alternative to the current developer-led model of housing development, I have read of many instances of cities doing their own development and then, of course, charging rent, but they can they don't need to make a profit, they just need to recoup the costs, so basically so that they can do it again. So they can put the rent quite a bit lower than regular developers do because they're not needing to make a profit, and that they can still like keep that cycle going. And because they're not a business, it's just the city doing it, there's much less red tape. They can just do stuff.
Thanks, Evelyn. Jess?
Moving back to the car-free zones or days or areas, I think something important to consider is a lot of the opposition for these areas is because there's no alternative, right? If you have accessibility needs, if you have children, or if you need to move furniture or other large items, groceries, what is the alternative? I can't walk to Walmart and bring back, 3 weeks worth of groceries on a cart, right? Like, something to consider could be things like, in addition to just saying this is a car-free area, also providing things like we have, a sort of taxi service of sorts, or like a train, or something that will help people get from A to B and also allow them to not be driving.
All right, I think we're going to leave it there because we've got to keep moving. I really want to thank you, Vivian and Danais. That was really informative, and I think it's stimulated a lot of conversation. So thank you so much for all that analysis and for bringing that to the Assembly. All right.
Thank you. Just a plug to please fill out our survey. Closes June 9th, so if you haven't done that already, I still have to do it myself. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, it's